So in order to set context today, I anticipated, Preston being here. He's been here a couple times already. Jonathan as well. It's his second time. Claire, I think you went to the first one. So I don't want to bore you guys with the same context setting. I'm going to do something that I don't do normally, and it's taking us all on a bit of an imaginal journey. I want to invite everybody to close their eyes to sort of embody this space together. And I'm going to take you to a particular location, a real location on the planet, a real location in the Great Lakes Basin. Last summer, I drove to Maine to work with Glenn Page. And on the way, I traveled south of Lake Erie and then south of Lake Ontario. And I had my dog in the car with me, and she could sense hiking trails around, so we had to stop. We pulled south of Lake Ontario, and went over a ridge and dropped down into a basin that seemed to drain to the south. We found a little hiking trail. We hiked in past ash. I believe there were birch, cherry trees, and we made our way to a ravine, a steep embankment that dropped down to a narrow river valley with an embankment on the other side that was maybe, 100 yards across. And the sun was low and it was shining through the trees. And I stumbled upon a fire ring where somebody had had campfires before. And so in the Great Lakes Basin, together, I want to invite us to imagine standing around that fire, knowing that across and to the west of that really inland sea we call Lake Ontario to the north are Joe and Penny, Brian and Susan, Dr. Dan Longboat, and many of the other kids and community members who are joining Joe and Penny on these bioregional activation explorations, conversations, weaving of bioregional relationships. And what are we doing here sitting around this fire circle? Well, we're just coming together in open conversation, inviting spontaneity, and seeing how we can, in this place, be in service to what's happening across the Great Lakes Basin. Seeing if there's anything that we can do to bring more life to that process. And so I want you to, in your imagination, look across the fire circle to the other participants. Now open your eyes and really see them. And so let's explore for a while, for an hour and 20 minutes or however long you've got, in conversation, in dialogue, and see what we can do together. And to seed the ground for the dialogue, I'd love to invite everyone to check in. Let me know how you're doing, what's coming up for you in relation to what's happening in the Great Lakes Basin, or as I said last time, if there's something else that's more personal, that's really present, that you feel is more important to share, I want to invite that as well. But let's hold the intention of being in service to the Great Lakes Basin throughout. And I'm curious if anybody feels like they're ready to kick things off.
I can start off.
Great, Anna.
I am feeling really just very lucky to have been able to join the Toronto events. I wish I could have joined more, but unfortunately I had to come home today because my husband is traveling for work, and I had to be with my dog. But just very thankful to be able to join that, and really looking forward to being able to join Rochester. At the moment, feeling a little overwhelmed too, just coming back from being off for a couple of days and jumping back into work, but just really recognizing that, this is just a pathway that I felt so passionate about, and very valued while I was there, and very like my time was just spent so valuably in the presence of Preston and Joe and Penny, and I'm really looking forward to continuing, especially talking with Penny. I feel like I haven't been able to talk to her too much, and she is just a really remarkable woman. Looking forward to continuing to work with her. So no, just very yeah, lucky.
Anyone else want to check in? Claire?
Sure. First of all, just thank you for that beautiful visual guided meditation. It really, that was really great. Yeah, I was actually feeling while I was watching the presentation this morning how grateful I was to that there was a recording, because I was just thinking in terms of the people you were guiding us into that meditation of like, who else is at the campfire and who else do I want to be at the campfire, and like wanting to reach out and wanting to kind of fill them in. And I know that I couldn't do justice to what like Joe really was. Joe, and I'm going to say Susan's presentation at the beginning, and Brian, what they brought into that as they set some context was amazing. And it just kind of, I think the thing that I often feel that is so critical is that when you can kind of feel the potential in the room crackling, it's like, that's exciting. And that's where you want to draw all your friends and you got to hear this. And yeah, I just, it feels like they were talking about the fractal quality of this work. And that's what it feels like. It's like when it feels right at the heart of everything that's happening and being said, it's like everything else can kind of increase in complexity, but it's actually building on a solid base. And that foundation just felt so amazing. So I just wanted to kind of start there. It was just, yeah, just feeling that the grounding, the integrity of this work is something that just feels energizing. So.
Preston?
Yeah, wow. This has been such a crazy 3-4 days and everything up to this point. The word that just keeps on jumping to mind is enormity. The aspect of the fractals. This call that was just had ended moments ago. 30 people from around the whole area and beyond that were very excited. People that haven't had conversations, having massive chats in the chat aspect of it, and wanting to like lean forward into this. But at the same time, the smallest, all of it is built out of relations and new relations being built, and that aspect of collectivity. So as an example, I'll tell you a little tiny story about yesterday. With Anna there, as well as the rest of the group that was at Pickering College. I was walking into a very old brick building, very old institutional, very colonial. I felt quite uncomfortable at many different levels walking into it. It wasn't a sort of home space for me, but I thought, no, we're here for a purpose, and it'll all unfold as it's supposed to. So I walked into this space, private school, everybody's wearing uniforms. I huddled off to a little corner and had a conversation with Anna and Penny, and found a little bit of a base to stand and to try to just breathe and feel. That was a piece there for myself and for a small group that's working here to make a difference. Then I saw Dr. Dan Longboat there, who I've read or watched a few of his interviews, had a bit of an idea where he was coming at, but never met him in person. And I wanted to meet him, but I wasn't quite in the right headspace to do it at that point. It wasn't until the end of the presentations, after the conversation with he and Joe, where they weave together completely spontaneously a story of place, a story of indigeneity, a story of history, of connecting to the land, to spirituality and beyond. I decided at that point afterwards I could go up and introduce myself. And the journey was about having come from a background of anthropology. Anthropology, I'm sure most of them are here, that it was the science that justified what was done to the indigenous peoples. It's the science that justified genocide. And so having a master's degree in it, sort of carrying that burden of that relationship and understanding how it has caused so much grief was an important thing, I thought, for me to reflect on in that moment. So I had come with a small gift for Dr. Dan Longboat, and I pulled it out, and what it was a small amount of tobacco. And the concept is that if you're going to ask a question of Indigenous elders, you offer something as a part of that journey. And so really what's supposed to happen is you offer it, and then if they decide to accept it, then you have sort of a contract, a relation there that they will then, you know, talk to you, give you information, give you knowledge. And so I pulled out the sachet of tobacco and explained my background in anthropology and my understanding, as I just did here, of how it fits, you know, his story of place and his story of his ancestors. And I handed it over to him and thanked him for that which he had provided to the group and how amazing that was. And it was such a moment of personal relationship. Nobody else knew about it. Nobody else was standing around. You're the only people besides my partner that have heard the story. But these are the moments, and building those connections and building those stories outward, that we each have this very personal journey to go on. And so trying to see it at the smallest levels, but also at the largest levels, and so many moving pieces. It's overwhelming. So yeah, that's my little story on where I'm at right now.
That is so cool. What I was experiencing when Benji was leading us on the visualization was that we were actually all standing around in the forest, and I was wondering why we weren't dressed for the weather, because it's so cold now right now. But I could smell the smoke from the fire, you know, that had been burning, and thought, wow, what if we were actually out in the woods sitting around and doing this? What would we be talking about? And the most amazing thing is that we'd be talking about a Zoom call with Joe, or you guys were there in person, right? So, but you know, I'm really interested in hearing the conversation. So we're pretty good. We had a marginally interesting call this morning with the Museum of National Science in Rochester, where the folks that we were talking to were putting up concrete walls. But we're going to see if we can leap over them and talk to some other people at the institution, because it really didn't get us very far. You know, the answers were all non-committal. Well, we're not doing anything. We're, you know, it's really interesting dealing with people in this culture, and becoming more and more a sense of foreignness compared to the conversations that we have amongst ourselves. So that's my check-in.
Well, my check-in, I loved everybody's check-in. Very moving, and I would love to hear more that people experienced on calls and whatever in Toronto, to become in the spirit of what we're doing in Rochester, because I tend to get kind of involved with the details to make sure that the logistics and the marketing and, you know, the relationships and the flyer and the, you know, and the space, you know, getting the space. And I know that the earlier I get into the context, really living it, embodying it, the better everything will go. So I would love to hear everything that happened, because I think I could learn from it if, you know, if Preston and Anna were willing. I'm sure whatever you share is going to be useful for everyone. And I'm talking to the head of the Genesee Land Trust, which I believe kind of takes responsibility for the river valley. You know, it's about the river valley that we're going to be exploring that runs into the Lake Ontario. It's the main feature here. And so I'd love to be coming from a place that would enroll her and find out where she is, because this is a brand new relationship and I don't want it to be about space. You know, about finding space. It's too important. And I've discovered there's two people on their board, Sarah Studwell and Carl Simon. Is it Simon? Carl at the Food Link.
Carl Simon.
That are on their board, and they look like they have a lot of fun. The picture of them is this on the website. This large group of people of all colors and shapes and sizes, obviously doing work on the land. So I think they're, you know, definitely compatriots. I know we know both of those people, and Sarah for sure is just, you know, salt of the earth. So that's, I want to anticipate, I mean, I want to have a vision. We started, Jonathan and I started thinking, okay, on Sunday, the end of the trip, when Penny and Joe are leaving, you know, who's around us, what will have been accomplished in the days. And we did that for that last event, but we didn't do it for any of the others. But I just want to use all the events as a stepping stone, as on your shoulders. I'll stop talking, but I'm always so surprised at how much there is. Oh, and when you did that little campfire thing, Benji, I am someone who is very tentative about nature, you know, like the idea of climbing walls, falling, you know, coming down embankments. It was like, oh my God. And, you know, and then knowing you growing up on the land, and it's like, well, you know, you've got such a great relationship with the land. You're going to find your car eventually. I was like, oh my God. It's like, so I know there's so much for me to be gaining in all of this. And I know I dress kind of corporately because there are some people that, you know, like that. Mostly I don't do that. But yeah, that's my background, and it's pretty much indoors.
Yeah, I've had a hard time getting her out into the garden.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
So
one step at a time. One step at a time. And thank you for the playful check-in. Honestly, like, because I was thinking that, you know, I was thinking when I thought for just a moment earlier today, like, if, you know, if I do a check-in or when I do a check-in, what I want to talk about. And Preston brought in the enormity of the situation. This is also profound. Anna mentioned something similar. Hey, Dan, what's going on, brother? We're going to pass it over to you in just a moment. I hope you don't mind. Everyone's checked in, but you and me, brother. So I've been getting voice memos. I'm so lucky, man. I get voice memos from Joe and Penny all the time. And what's struck me, amongst many things, is Joe's ability to be super playful amongst this position that could be so burdensome. I mean, he's got so much on his shoulders. yet he's just ready to crack a joke at all times. Like he's so loose. I don't know how. Like it's what a skill. And I think I mentioned this at the end of the exploratory session on last Friday, about how there's this interesting connection. It's almost a paradox between the amount of love that we have for the world, for experience, for every single moment, and the amount that we can then grieve for it, the amount of devotion that we can carry in ourselves. And I think that playfulness really facilitates that, like the love for every single little moment, the celebration of the small things. A lot of this was born out of the conversations I've been having with Claire around community art. You know, how can community art be a celebratory process where we're really appreciating just moments of expression and discovering relationships between people, expressing ourselves into the world, you know, being, I don't really know how else to put this. This might sound strange coming out of my mouth, but being the prettiest flowers we can be, you know, something like that. So anyways, I just wanted to, I'm so glad that Victoria was like loose and playful with her check-in, because I think that is such an important spirit to carry amongst this, like what could be otherwise a heavy feeling. It can just cut right through it. Can help us to come into right relationship with all of it. And so, Dan, how you doing? And then we'll jump into dialogue. Good to see you.
I'm it's a long story, but I ducked into this restaurant and it was real quiet. I was the only one in here, and just as I logged on, they turned up the volume. Like, I'm gonna ask you to get somebody else to take the floor. I'm gonna ask them if they can turn the volume down, because I don't even know if you can hear me. So I'm gonna pass it to whoever else was up next, and then I'll come back to me if you don't mind.
We don't mind at all, man. It's
All right,
good to
thank
see you.
you.
Yeah. Yeah, we could hear you, by the way, but do your thing for sure. Yeah, with that, does anybody feel like they've got something they want to bring in to get the dialogue flowing? And Preston, was there something you wanted to share about something? Preston.
Sure, I'll touch on Victoria's comments about what you know, being such a part of the machinery and the details rather than the larger experience. It is people like you. It's Brian, who I don't think I've had more than like 10-15 seconds of conversation with Brian, that is creating the opportunities. So Benji being here, just opening the floor, these are the things that are providing these potentials to talk, because this is such. So now I've been to 2 of the conversations that Joe's had with the students. I've been to the one online here earlier. There's not much time. People really are not having a chance to interact. And this is such a long journey and so many steps. So just providing that platform for a period of time, and it's going to take more time, because these are just the initial steps. It's not, I mean, we all arrive at an event, we rush in, we chat a little bit, and then we listen. You know, a few assertive people throw up their hands, and there's a couple conversations, and then we all run back to our little cars and we all zoom around to where we need to go next. There's no time to actually begin doing anything yet. That's a really long, big picture. But if you don't go to the effort to create these platforms, those conversations never happen. And so I think the work that you guys are doing is so integral. You know, some of us aren't always the most supportive, because we tend to be in confrontational places. We're asking questions, we're pushing buttons sometimes, but the actual level of appreciation for that platform, it's enormous. You know, my opportunity to offer that to Diane Longboat wouldn't have happened had this whole piece not come together. There was no moment otherwise that could have gelled like that. So I wanted to reflect on it. And then the other side is, you know, when I'm doing my corporate stuff, I've got the suit and tie happening as well. So I wear many hats. Never be afraid of all the different hats we have to put on to make these systems work, because we all live in a lot of different worlds all at the same time. Pass off.
Yeah, Claire.
Yeah, Benji's heard me talking about this quite a bit, but I really feel like I'd like to bring it in. It picks up on the comment that was made a couple of times during the call this morning, was moving at the speed of trust. And then just I wanted to sort of juxtapose a few images. One is, when Benji, when you so beautifully invoked that embodied feeling of being in the land, I was sort of thinking, yeah, what about what happens when we're sitting around a table with food and you're sharing food together? And there is a sort of sense of conviviality of, if you're enjoying it and the food is really amazing, you're kind of in the moment. So you're present because you're actually tasting the food. You're actually in conversation with the people. And when that happens, all of the stuff that, like the theoretical sort of cleverness, like there's a whole mix of stuff, but there's a kind of magic that holds it together. And I just wanted to bring that in because I think it's so important when we're talking about how we actually create the conditions for the conversations that we're coming in today, like the reasons why, and the heaviness of it, and then the theory of it. Growing up in South Africa, my parents were very involved in the whole, it wasn't just anti-apartheid, it was really, how do we envision a new country, a new South Africa, a new society? And because we were so geographically isolated, it was, that was normal. And it was so entrenched as normal to have racism completely embedded into everything. So it was radical trying to envision something different because we just didn't encounter that unless you created it. And we had some of the major movers and like the people who were doing that work were part of our dining room. My parents were very, very good hosts and weavers, and they were connected enough that there was all of that high level conversation going on, and a lot of stuff actually happened from those places. But it was around a dining room table where there was food, and it created bridges in places that dialogue just could not. And I guess that's what my point was, just to bring it to, it's when these events are organized, unless we're creating the conditions of conviviality, of people being able to come together, where we're not looking at the problem that we're trying to deal with directly, we're kind of looking at it sideways. So we're enjoying ourselves, we're coming together. That's where the real power starts to happen, the shift starts to happen. And I'm speaking to that because it was so powerful for me from South Africa, where it was only when we started to hear music that was actually not Black music, not white music, it was like South African music. And it was a common sense of identity. And the music may have had political stuff in it, it may not have, but there was something that was very embodied. I'm sorry, I'm kind of going on a little bit, but I just wanted to say that it was in the colors and the vibrancy of the art and then the dance and there was a common sense of identity that was able to then create those conditions of trust and common value and identity that allowed those bigger, higher level conversations to happen. And to me, I've seen over and over again how people try and get at the problem by dealing with the stuff, like the higher level conversation. I don't know that you can do that without the conditions being there. So anyway, I'll stop, but I just want to bring that in.
I just want to touch for just a second, and if you don't mind, and just reflect on the complementary nature of what Preston said and what Claire said. Preston's talking about the value of these conversational containers and people holding them, but their limitations in that we fight rush hour traffic to get there. We got to find parking. We go inside. We hear this thing. Maybe we interact with a few people. Maybe the event itself is designed for interaction, and that's great. But at the end of the event, maybe there's a little line, you talk to the speaker, maybe you brush shoulders with a few people, and then you're gone. How important is the complement of hosting dinners, extending the conversation, making it personal, inviting people into our homes, bringing this all the way down to the personal? So I just felt like they really played off each other really well. Yeah, over to you, Anna.
Yeah, and I was really, I had something to say, but then listening to Preston and Claire, I loved what you guys were saying. I feel like I'm kind of clarifying my thoughts. I just wanted to go back to, some of the stuff that Victoria was saying, and I feel like you had sort of a self-deprecating kind of tone to it, but I just wanted to acknowledge that I think that, first of all, you are a powerhouse. You are really a driving force of our core team. And I think that really what's really important is that, yes, like, I think not only are you focusing on all the details, but you are consistently bringing it back to the relationships that we're forming. And I think that that is a huge focus of what we're trying to do, and having that in mind and all of the details that you're selecting for. That's really what I notice, is this focus on relationships. And I am really looking forward to Rochester events, because I think in Toronto, they have a vision of getting, like, all of the stuff that they've been doing. They are trying to connect with schools. They're trying to connect with so many of their already established relationships. So it has been a little bit more, like what Preston said, like we come in, we sit down, and then we leave. And their structure is very regimented right now, as is the vision for what Seven Generations is doing. But I think that with Rochester, our vision is a little bit different. And I foresee, like, that was one thing that as soon as the events ended, I was kind of like, so what are you guys doing? Are you going out to dinner anywhere? Can I, like, I wanted to just kind of spend that downtime with them and just talk to them. But unfortunately, they've been so busy going, that I'm really looking forward to those opportunities of going out to someplace casual. And I was actually thinking, Joe was talking about how he loves experiencing the cities, through his mouth. He like eating like Rochester based foods. Take him out to go get garbage plates or something that is uniquely Rochester, and just sit around and really get to know each other, and whoever is with us, they can also get to know him. So I think that would be really, really valuable. I think, casual, informal, not super, super duper planned, but like still having that kind of that plan of just having that downtime with them, I think will be very valuable.
Something to that. And we had in fact planned to drag them to Dinosaur Barbecue.
Right. I remember that discussion now.
I was afraid about, the people who might be vegans, but I called, and they do have some vegan offerings.
Mm-hmm.
But, there are many places. I'm the Garbage Plate. I've never been there. We've never been to barbecue either. But also the Genesee Brew House with the view of the falls, far away view of the falls. But yeah, I'm curious, did you have food? Thank you for that acknowledgement. I know that I've done events before and was absolutely, flat out for a month kind of thing. But the event was like super valuable. And we still hear about it today, and some amazing relationships came out of it. So I do know how important it is. Jonathan usually goes out and stakes something. We're going to do this. And then I'm behind him making it happen. Sometimes resentful in the beginning, but usually get over that. So I have a question. Was there food at any of the events so far? No food. Okay.
There was like cookies and coffee yesterday. So very, very simple.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay. And that works, that worked? Was that enough?
Oh yeah, I don't even know how many people took cookies. We also, so the event yesterday too, I'm not sure if anybody watched it virtually and if they could tell, but there was kids kept on kind of, I think that we had different classes join, and then somehow they knew when their class was over and they would leave and different kids would come in, and there was just kind of a continuous flow of Joe and Dr. Longboat talking. And then Ethan stepped up, who is the younger guy who is working with 7th Generation. So it was very kind of a casual flow. So I'm not even sure how many people were eating, but I think that it was plenty for a mid-afternoon
Mhm.
eating.
I understand we're gonna, either the Greentopia is going to provide wine and cheese, or we're going to go out and get wine and cheese, because it's that kind of place. Greentopia. So yes, I can't imagine them doing anything without wine and cheese. And they're great, and they're connected us with the Genesee Land Trust. And they're giving the space for free. It's great. It's really great to hear, not to worry.
So what's really happened as a result of the trip is it's triggered all of these activities that are bringing people out of the woodwork and are bringing people together in ways. We'd met Roy a couple of times, but we would never have gotten as deeply into relationship with him if it were not for this. And so it's it's pretty interesting to see what's going to come out at the end.
Yeah,
I am
absolutely.
just wondering
Claire.
I am just wondering in response to what you were talking about with possible food and what have you. Some things that I've been to before where there are kind of self-organizing options added in to like a speaking event or whatever, where sometimes it's a hotel lounge where people can kind of just go and get a drink or kind of, but they can in groups kind of go and organize themselves into conversations. Nothing's actually organized. It's the ability to just self-organize, but people are so charged up after like a really the stuff that's coming needs processing, and if there's just that option, it may only be a few people, but sometimes that can be really generative. So I just to throw that in there, is researching some optional place, maybe a pub, maybe something that's options where it doesn't have to be just alcohol. But anyway.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, this is an indication of the campfires getting closer to the ground as we go over logistics for food and sorting out how conviviality can unfold. How interesting. Yeah. Dan, I saw you unmute for a second. There your hand goes up. Looking for the mute button. We still can't hear you, Dan. Dan, can you hear us? Dan.
Okay, I hope there's not too much background noise here. Okay, there are two things I'm hearing, and I'm sorry that I came late because I know you made a reference, Anna, to Victoria's comments before, and I didn't hear those comments, but I kind of got the gist of it. But there's two things I'm hearing. One is the importance of food. I totally agree with that. I mean, I experienced that myself whenever I was a project manager, and before, I can't even remember, sometime in the 90s, we were allowed to, when we'd start a big project, I'd build a team, or whoever the project manager was, not necessarily me, but and then we'd call to kick off the project, we'd call a meeting, and people were all across the United States at that time, and it got bigger, they were around the world eventually, but the teams that I was managing, projects that I was managing, they were across the US. So we would have a week-long kickoff in Denver or Dallas, somewhere in the middle of the US, and people would fly from wherever they were. And for a week, we would talk about what the project scope and all that stuff. But the reason I'm telling you this is that in the evening, then everybody's in their hotel. right? So in the evening, we all go to dinner. And that was so powerful because people would break bread and they would gain trust. And it was just palpable. And projects were, I think, were successful and ran better. And we were able to overcome so many obstacles and complications because the trust was there. And then later, the corporation changed and we couldn't do that anymore. Everything had to be remote and virtual. And so I would start big projects and with groups of people that never met each other. They didn't know each other. Some of them were on other continents, and getting to a point with that trust. Sometimes we never got there. So that I'm echoing what you're saying, Claire. I think that's so important. And so, you know, even if it's just cookies, I think that's great. But the other thing that I really want to say here is that you just touched on it for a second, and it was this in the different subregions, you know, like let's just take the Great Lakes in this case, for example. You know, Rochester is a little different from, you know, some of the others, you know, because you got you know, Brian's 7th generation is a little different from what you're going to be hosting but you know, there is a shared sense of identity. And I think it's important, you know, and I'm sure Joe knows this, but I'm going to call it out now anyway. Maybe I'm preaching to the choir, but to make sure that when you have when we meet, that we really understand right in that first session, because what you said, Preston, about people rush in, they have that hour or whatever of talk, and then they go back to their lives. And it's hard to maintain a sense of continuity and to build, you know, the trust that we're talking about. So when we're in those meetings, I think it's real important, you know, sure, we know what the differences are, but to really establish or clarify or state out loud real clear terms, and maybe more than once, you know, what are those shared identity elements? What are the things, you know, that are shared, and clarify it. Because I know, you know, I haven't seen one that he's given lately, but I know what he talks about, you know, and you know, it does produce a sense of shared identity. I mean, we're all on this planet, and we're all sharing the, you know, the air and the weather and, you know, the economy. So anyway, I just wanted to point to those two things. I don't know if that's helpful or not. It really helps me to kind of kick it around and talk about it a little more to clarify. But Jonathan or Victoria, I think you have your hand up. You want to take the floor?
Yeah, I just made a note to myself based on what you're saying, and my experience in the corporate world was absolutely that way. That's where at the bar is where you gain trust. The bar is easier because you can walk around different people. When you're sitting down to eat, you kind of have to, you get to know the people on either side, but that's it. And yeah, so it's always, that's always the best place at the hotel bar, because you don't even have to have an invitation. You just show up. I wanted to ask about the tenor of one of the events. On Saturday, on Friday night, we have more of a presentation from 6 to 8, trying to capture people before they go home, you know, out of the city. If they happen to be working in the city. So on Saturday, we're doing a tour, a field trip, like a caravan field trip. I don't know, did you say there were 10 people that may have? I don't know how many people are signing up, but we'll start out in a place and go by car. Hopefully people will carpool, we'll meet, and people will get out of their single cars and go into cars with other people. And we'll go to a couple of the sites. And that'll go from 10 to 2. And then 2, we have a meeting room, which we have something on hold at the library, but it is kind of what Preston described as not a convivial space. It's a Debbie Downer. It's the museum that was built in, 1900, and it's empty and quiet because all the good stuff is across the street in the new building, So this is like for really old people and people who want to do research on something in that building. So we're trying not to have it there. We're still looking for a place. One of the places, so I know the idea is to get to embodiment and to get to, on Saturday afternoon, who are the people that will join us as we continue. And we hope to convey that in the materials, you know, and I haven't gotten the first layer yet to get the second layer and the third layer of getting the right people there. One of the choices is going to be the Museum of Science that we might have a room in, and they may give us a pro bono room. And we'd love to have that as the room that the team meets all the time. And that would be a great grounding place. It's just not that forward looking a place like a lot of museums. But one of the things about getting that pro bono room was to invite the staff, the museum staff, to come to that event from 2 to 4. And originally we were thinking, you know, this is going to be the embodiment. These are people who might have been on the field trip. This is maybe people who came on Friday night. And, you know, it would be really more familial, getting to know one another with Joe. Don't even know if we'll use AV. Haven't talked to Joe about it. He'll probably get more of a sense after these various trips. But I wanted to ask you all, it's not the last event. The last event is the next morning at our house as a potluck brunch before they go, because they're leaving at like 1. And we have a lot of people that RSVP'd for that. I'm not worried about that. But I want to make sure that 2 to 4 time is something that's so valuable that people who went on the field trip for those 4 hours stay and talk. Everything people are saying is that they need time to talk with one another, you know, face to face, not in the cars and stuff like that. So what do you all think that session should be? And I suppose it has to do with, do we have the museum people there or not? You know, so.
I thought we already named the session.
We did, but, you know, I'm going to be following up with things and encouraging people to go to all the events.
Mhm.
People generally pick one. You know, go on Friday and you're going to want to go on Saturday and Sunday. Okay, I'll stop talking.
Thanks.
Well, you know, something that just does pop to mind, and I'm just going to throw it out there because as you were speaking, I think it is great to have a space that feels more conducive to having people, but I think the ability to be able to self-organize is really good when you've had an intensive time together. But food is definitely something, and you know, I think sometimes even if it's just one thing amongst others, but something that comes from the region that maybe has indigenous roots of some kind, not necessarily from indigenous people, but just it's from indigenous food. Like it's something that's actually from that place that is a cuisine. So one of the things that is just so exciting about the West Coast is that we have like a celebration of the food from here. And it's there's just incredible food that feels like you're celebrating the place, plus you're eating something really amazing. Like there's this, so if there's something like that, to me, that adds a spark. And the other thing I was wondering about was, you know, Robin Wall Kimmerer in her book Braiding Sweetgrass writes about the basket weavers who used the black ash to weave the baskets with. I'm just wondering if there was something that, like, there's such a process that comes from the land, and it's actually part of the conservation of the land. Like, it doesn't need to be an indigenous group, but I'm just thinking there's the basket weavers and they're right in your area. But there are others, if there was somebody who, some physical objects or some, but you need to have those contacts. I'm just trying to think of, but something that kind of helps to transform the space, even like just bright tablecloths and things that, that kind of transform a space without a whole lot of, like, you don't want to stress yourselves out trying to do that. But there is a way of You know, I don't know if you've ever had the experience of a bunch of people getting together to do the grad dance, and it's like some horrible hall that they completely transform with like quite clever things. That I'm not suggesting that at all, but tablecloths and a few other things. I'm happy to talk about that a bit more at another point. But like we've done all kinds of things with the most horrible places and really transformed them. And how you set them up makes a big difference, and the food for sure. So yeah.
Victoria, you are muted.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, and it compels me to do something way more than I ever would have thought of. So, Claire, thank you, and I might call you to get some ideas if it turns out we're going to be at the museum. But we're still looking at other places, and I will. And Anna, you know, Anna is going to be there, and Anna, you can stay with my sister probably because Joe and Penny are going to be here. But my sister has an extra room. I'm sure she'd be happy to have you. If you're planning.
I was actually planning on heading home, so I have something to do Saturday morning, so no worries.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. But Saturday night you could stay over to come to breakfast. Okay, we'll talk.
I wonder if Preston or Anna, if there's anything that either of you would like to share with the group that came up in the presentations that you attended. If there was anything that, any insights, any new perspectives, yeah, anything from the conversation itself that you'd like to bring into this conversation to surface, to broadcast, to share.
So I have one thing. I think that in the, so as I said in the event yesterday, I think Dr. Longboat being there was definitely like such an amazing highlight, but there was a lot less opportunity for discussion. There's actually no opportunity for discussion. And that was a piece that I really liked from the Monday event, where we had about 15 minutes. We were all seated at tables with at least one adult and the kids from the schools at each table. And Joe had a very direct questions for the kids. I think, you know, we can definitely cater it to the audience for sure, because they were a little bit more simplified, like, you know, how could you be an earth regenerator? But I really thought that that was a great opportunity, just setting that aside to make sure that groups are kind of able to discuss amongst themselves what they think they could do after the event. Some kids had some really interesting ideas too, that they really thought about it. So
Yeah, thank you for that. Does anybody want to carry on from
Let me
what-
just ask a question about so it was part of the Monday event to ask the participants, what can we do after this? And that was a 15-minute discussion.
yeah. Joe set it up very nicely for the questions that he had. Yeah, just kind of like a guided discussion for like people to really be on their own and thinking and speaking together in a smaller group and kind of coming up with things. So I thought that that was really valuable.
That's great. We hadn't thought about smaller groups, but we should definitely make sure that there's enough time for everybody to talk.
And Joe may facilitate that as well. He did that in both Paonia and Carbondale. So I think that's part of his one of the structural items that he leans into as a facilitator. Yeah.
And did he does he usually want like a U shape, circle kind of thing, or a circle?
He invites a lot of improvisation, and it's one of his techniques is to invite the participants to situate the chairs however they see fit, and oftentimes that results in a circle. And Joe is a fantastic facilitator, so keep that in mind. You probably don't need quite as much structure as you may be anticipating. Maybe the space, like thinking about the space more than anything. Yeah. Any other questions before we go to Preston? I saw Preston put his hand up. Preston.
No, I was just gonna echo more or less what Anna said. I assume that it was mostly Joe's ability to adapt to the space. Two very, very different presentations on those 2 days. And I think part of really why even the first one worked about the conversations, because trying to get teenagers to talk amongst adults is virtually impossible. But there was an aspect of awkward silence for a while. But he also left it open. He's like, chat if you want, or don't. It's there's nobody's here to be forced to do anything. You're here because you want to be here and engage. And so there's always a few people that are like, oh wow, and start talking. And so we were able to riff off of that kind of that sort of thing. And then I think out of like 8 tables, only 2 of them end up sort of speaking out, have been presenting their ideas, just to make it feel like part of the community and to engage. The other setting, it was actually what happened also at the end of that one is Joe was able to facilitate where he got everybody to just do a large circle, but he said it only came to him in the last few minutes before it actually happened to create that opportunity. And so it's really how it unfolds. And then the scenario with Dan Longboat was just a completely different framework in there because the way the seating was arranged. And I think the aspect that there were students coming and going would have made it virtually impossible to do any other sort of strategy. So yeah, I think that the ability of him to shift and work with it, regardless of what you come up with, it'll turn into something different than what you're expecting it to be. And it's sort of the beauty of that, because spontaneity allows people to interact in ways that it's pretty hard to predict.
I wonder if I can ask more specifically some of the responses or questions from both the kids. I don't know if you have any examples, because I'm just so curious. Like, I haven't interacted with a whole lot of teenage aged people within these contexts, within these conversations, and I'm just so curious about their worldview to generalize. And then I'm also really interested in the conversation between Dr. Dan Longboat, right? Mohawk elder, and the conversation they had specifically between or about the intersection of indigenous wisdom and science is how I understand it. I wondered if we could touch on both of those at some point in time, if either Preston or Anna, if you have something you want to share.
I can start. So I think for the second event, I don't know if there were actually any people who had any questions at the second event. Some of the adults had questions after the presentation, but the kids coming and going, they didn't really have the opportunity to. In the first event, I know at the table that I was sitting at, the kids were pretty shy, but we ended up talking about, they were in a geology class and they were all working on presentations about different natural wonders of the world that are like untouched by, or relatively untouched by a human civilization. So, talking about the Galapagos Islands, or I can't remember all of them now, but it was really interesting kind of hearing them talk about just how it was similar to their to the presentation and how it fit in with what they were learning about. We were also talking a little bit about that, like, they didn't know where Lake Ontario was. Some of them, they didn't know how far away it was. They didn't, and I've noticed that too. I do some outreach locally with Buffalo Niagara Waterkeepers, and just these kids, they were in 7th grade, so they're 12. Some kids don't know our water comes from Lake Erie. Like, something as simple as what a watershed is kind of like, I don't know. So, just kind of talking about where it is, how do you go there? They had questions about, like, can you swim in Lake Erie? So we were kind of talking about how water pollution, so like maybe you can't swim in Lake Erie or in Lake Ontario in Toronto. I was comparing it to my experience in Buffalo. So even having those kinds of simple conversations with them, I think it's really interesting, especially kids that are from the city. Might have no clue what rivers are by them. I find it's very helpful when you have like we have a map with Buffalo Niagara water keepers where we have like where the watersheds are and all of the rivers, and so helping them point out where's your house and do you recognize this creek? Some of them don't. So even talking about that can help with some kids. But then there were others, like the kids that actually talked about like what Preston was saying, is he was saying how like one kid had an idea of trying to get some of the snow melts. How could, one of the ways that we could regenerate is we have so much snow. How can we redirect the snow melt to like help irrigate some of the forests around us? Or, showed some kind of an interest in a community garden. So I think the kids are just all kind of on different spectrums, and the older kids were the ones that presented. I think they probably looked like they were like 14. So.
Yeah, Preston.
Yeah. So it was 2 kids, probably 11 or 12 at our table. Our table was mostly adults. I think for the 2 of them, because again, similarly, the classroom situation had structured geography, geology lessons around this presentation, so they had some aspect of relevance to bring to it. But I think they found, from what I was hearing from them, the fact it was very tangible. So they could see the relationship at this point to the land. So much of what happens in the school system is very abstracted. Sort of that textbook learning. I think Joe having pictures of his daughter, is the children learning from the elders, and the story of walking the landscape, the river, what the river recovery was going to be. Suddenly they could see themselves in that story of place. And so from that, it definitely brought more conversation to the table. At our table, after everybody had talked a little bit, I mentioned, because we live in an urban environment, I mentioned about how what I had done to our property here, that I had, did the native pollinator plants, and had sort of focused on, we get rain, let's hold rain into ponds to be able to infiltrate the land a little bit better, letting it run off. And immediately there were 1 or 2 other adults were very excited about the pollinator aspect and very interested in how to make it relevant at a very hands-on level. So I think that aspect was an important part of that journey for them. Second question was about the Indigenous knowledge and the science. I mean, the beauty of how Joe approaches this is it interweaves so seamlessly already. So that part was integral to how he gave the presentation. And really the 2 of them, Dr. Dan Longboat and they really riffed off of each other. It was a back and forth continual conversation. So there was no feeling of separation of these concepts. Later, when I spoke and presented my bit of tobacco to Dan, he commented back to me that, having the Master of Science degree, having that, intrinsic knowledge, but now reflecting on the cultural aspects, the longer stories in relation to the interrelation of all the ecosystems, he was very excited about that. So there was that aspect of the third way, I think, was coming into the storyline, how there's enough interplay between all of these approaches to find a very solid pathway through. But I mean, in the end, really what's going to come down to is there'll be those few people that see that aspect, and those that are still, the chase after the corporate pathway. That's just where we're at in the history of place here. So, yeah.
Claire.
I have a question for both of you about the school children. Thank you both. Is just wondering if they had teachers that were there, and the role that the teacher was playing as a facilitator. Like, how helpful was the teacher that was there in terms of sort of creating opportunity and unlocking their, interest, enthusiasm. Because just wondering.
Oh, sorry, Preston, if you want to go first, you can go ahead.
So as I say, at our table, there wasn't a teacher. So there's more students, obviously, than there were teachers. So we didn't see that facilitation at our table. We did ours a little bit differently. My guess is that the teachers would use this more as a leveraging point afterwards to bring it back around in further discussions at a later time. But that's just my guess, because I didn't see any interaction with teachers there at that time.
Yeah, and that was the same. I was actually the only adult at my table. And I think I do think that having a familiar adult probably would have garnered more conversation. I was kind of like almost pulling teeth in the beginning, trying to get them to talk to me. But yeah, I think having some sort of if I were to do it again, probably recommend having some familiar adults, or having time to kind of talk to them beforehand. I kind of joined after this discussion had started. I sat down at the table, and the other adult that was there ended up getting up and leaving. So I like quickly introduced myself, but having some more time to kind of get to know the kids, I think, is really important too.
Dan, was there something you wanted to say?
Well, I just like, and maybe you guys all know the answer, but I don't. Well, what is next? I mean, because it just seems so powerful what just happened, and that without any kind of follow through, or like second, what's going to be the next thing for the kids, and are we going to those discussions that happen around those tables, were the cogent points captured? Are there going to be teachers that follow through with the kids? Are the kids going to, I mean, Kristen, you said, yeah, we all go back to our corporate lives and it dissipates. Is there has anybody talked about that? Is that being, put together, or as far as what's going to be next for the, because I think that's just so powerful to have what you guys did with student school age kids. What do you say they were between 10 and 12 years old? Is that where most? Yeah,
Well,
the range.
Probably, I think 12 to 14 was
Okay,
yeah.
So man, but I don't know. It's like, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now? It seems to me that the children would be a huge impetus in activating that bioregion. And like I said, maybe the answers are already, you guys already have figured all that out, but I don't know. I haven't been that close to all this, so I hope I'm not disrupting the conversation by asking these questions. Maybe you guys have it all figured out. What is next?
That's an
Not
important
at
question to
all.
ask.
But I mean, I think there is one clear direction, which is kind of the North Star that Joe has set, which is to build a learning center for the bioregion, and to try to connect up these ideas of the ecoversities in each region, because that's where what's missing in many cases, especially for young people in education today, is a sense of the reality that they live in, where their water comes from, where the food comes from, how the rivers flow, what it is that we're doing to the land. One of the real fundamental insights that occurred for me in the past year or so is that we look out on these green lawns in suburbia as if they're something wonderful and beautiful, when in fact they're green deserts. And the land is being suppressed underneath these supposedly verdant pastures that are supposed to be reminiscent of pastoral life in England. except there's no sheep wandering around the lawns in the suburbs these days. Maybe that would help if there were. But definitely the concept of continuing on with the educational journey is, to me, what is the thrust after these events. And the question is, can we sustain that momentum? Do we have enough people who are interested in the educational challenges to do that? So that's what I have to say. I don't know if you, there's a couple of other people waiting to talk to. So
Right. Yeah, one of the things we have is this Monday 4 to 5:30 call on the Great Lakes. So we could definitely invite people to those. And I was thinking, based on the conversation here, that we would, if we have the time available, that call goes from 4 to 5:30, that we might have a Rochester-based call from 5:30, so people could take a break, have, a snack at home. We would do it here physically if there's a team that wants to come here, and we'd also be virtual. And I don't know if that's enough. I was hoping and thinking that we should maybe plan a day out in maybe a month where we're going to do something. We have a space, we're going to do something. We don't know what that is. But that will get clearer as we go, but just to have a time and a place. So I have like 4 other questions, but I'd love to hear people, and Benji was next. So,
actually,
and Claire. Oh, I didn't
Claire.
I've got a bit. Benji, you go ahead and I'll.
Oh, please, I'd love to hear from you. I'm happy to wait.
Okay, well, it was just about the school kids, and I don't know if their youth going to be involved in any of the other ones. It's just, if I'm thinking about 3 of the different school groups that we work with regularly, and they come into more adult conversations. Like we struggle with, like, how do we make sure that it's way more inviting to them? But one of the things just to mention, in every case, there's usually a teacher champion of some kind that kind of helps to bridge and create those pathways in, and then also develop opportunities that help with that. I think occasionally there's been like these self-starter kids that really can kind of carry it, but most of the time not. So anyway, when we're connecting with youth, it's so important to find who are the champions. And sometimes it's unlikely people. It may not be directly the teacher, but it's somebody some adult within that schooling system that helps to, I don't know, create those bridge building opportunities. I just wanted to bring that in because it's quite significant, really stands out to me.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. That leads in pretty nicely to what I wanted to say. And that this is all about what happens afterwards. I mean, this is all about this being ongoing and continuing to develop and to mature and to adapt. And a lot of what we think about now is, what are the support structures? What are the ongoing learning opportunities? Primarily at this stage, who are the crazy catalysts, the master weavers, the champions who will carry this thing forward? Because that's essential. The few people, sometimes even one person, as the case in Barichara being Joe, who is willing to devote themselves entirely to making sure this doesn't die out, this energy doesn't fizzle, that we really do not only build out support scaffolding in the form of like meetings that you're alluding to, Victoria. The Monday calls are great. What other, temporal scaffolding? Once a month meetings can you hold? Every lunar cycle you do something, and really have that, hold it at its bare minimum, but really all the other relationships that need to be woven, that want to be woven, and we can never predict what those are. There's no design pathway for that. It's just certain individuals who are deeply devoted going out and trying to figure out, how can the region come together? How can we learn as a region? How can we weave together in continually increasing capacities? And and ultimately look to the common land model for integrated landscape management, the landscape partnership processes of developing a platform where we have a shared intention for bioregional scale regeneration. We're continuing to, within that platform, learn more and more all the time about local ecology, local history, about each other. We're coming into deeper relationship. We're, through those two as foundation, developing a shared vision for where we want this to go. And then we're actually getting out there and we're prototyping, we're engaging in action, we're doing things together. We're learning what works and what doesn't, and we're putting more energy into what works. We're bringing in regenerative finance tools to really bring more and more life to what works. And then we're learning from all of it. We're seeing all of it. We're mapping all of it, and we're iterating. We're adapting. And so yeah, that's sort of my my answer to where this goes next. It's all very exciting, but it takes people who are deeply devoted and who understand what bioregional learning actually means and the nuances therein. Anna.
Yeah, and I just wanted to kind of go back to like Claire's question about like, and what you were saying, Benji, like the catalyst, the person that I think as David Sloan Wilson calls them, the fiery soul. It's so they do have one pretty impressive kid, Ethan. He's very well spoken. He spoke at both events. I believe, I can't say for sure what Seven Generations is planning moving forward, but it seems that they're kind of trying to get these school talks to be part of that, what they call Talk with Ethan. And Ethan speaks more to like intergenerational relationships and strengthening that with youth speaking with their elders, and incorporating that into thinking about climate change. And I think that really they're kind of using him as like that catalyst to invite kids to join him. I don't know if they're doing other events at schools moving forward, but that seems to me what the focus is for the next one. So, and in that link that I shared, that's future events that they're doing this talk with Ethan, and then a summit in April. So I'm sure that they're going to be planning more community relationships with schools.
Well, go Ethan. So happy to hear that Ethan exists. That's awesome. I hope I get to see him talk one day. Yeah, Victoria, I see your hand, and then
Yeah.
I wonder if we could kind of begin to wrap up. We're getting close.
I have a couple of short questions.
Please.
And I'll find out if there's anyone here that wants to talk offline. I wanted to understand what kind of audio visual, because we'd love to tape the events. And if there's people that say don't tape them because whatever. So we might have to do it with our own phones, but don't know exactly what the equipment is. Probably at Friday night, they've got good equipment. But Saturday afternoon, we may just wing it with phones and a tripod. Any quick answer on whether or not we do AV?
I mean, I think that it would be very valuable to record and stream it. These events had professional videographers, so like hired people to come in with all that and mics on Joe. So I would say for us, I mean, I've watched plenty of webinars where it's clearly somebody taking it off their phone or their laptop or their tablet, and we just got to set it up right so that Joe's in the focus. And I like the idea of passing the phone around for participants who want to participate that way. I think that personally, that would be fine with what we have, working with what we have.
Great. Since we have such a short time, I was going to
say, if they are professional video, like audio, communications video people, they may already have this in place, but if they don't, you may want to just communicate with them. But if they don't, you may need to have a privacy form as people come in and they just sign off, because that's one of the biggest hurdles is unless you've crossed that barrier, they don't want to be filmed and you're not allowed to use it. So just do it right. I would check with them first. They probably got something in place, but otherwise prepare something and have it at the event.
Yeah, we don't have to film the audience. We can just.
No, but anytime you're doing any photography of anybody in public setting,
Yes.
in Canada, you need to have done that.
Okay, so we might need a consent form. Okay. Good. Very good. We have a choice of various sites, and we've done some kind of culling, but if anybody has a priority on what kinds of sites we would take people to on a field trip, and it's be caravan. We have Litchford State Park, which it's an hour away, but it's one of the wonders of the world. You know, it's on the East Coast. It's one of the big highlights. It's a major. It's like they call it the Grand Canyon of the East. And do you think these things are that important, Benji, or what kind of things would be the things that Joe would want to speak to looking at it?
I think it's really valuable to be able to stand together as a community that has just entered this bioregional dialogue, is for the first time maybe wanting to see the landscape together, to be somewhere where you can actually see a landscape function, where you can see a living expression of the land, where you can understand it a little bit. That said, I don't know if I would drive an hour because a lot of people are going to be pretty tired. When we were in Paonia, we drove about 10 to 15 minutes away from downtown up on top of a mesa to overlook the valley below and see the mountains, the Elk Mountains, and the river system drained towards the desert to the west. And that was really nice. And that was about as far, I think, as anybody wanted to drive.
Okay. All right. Well, we have the falls, and we have the high falls, the wonderful falls, and
yeah.
Okay, but yeah, go ahead, Claire.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, like, to me, this is a huge opportunity. You may not have enough time to do it, but there've got to be other people in the region. And I'm thinking in our region, like Brandy Gallagher of the Eco Village, what she can speak to of being in place is so compelling to people because she's actually there and telling the stories. And for you to go and try and introduce that, if you don't have a good relationship with why it's significant, you're just not able to bring that depth unless you've got that history. So this is an opportunity to find the people that are in place and bring them in to tell that story. And it also models, like, to me, what bioregional learning is. It's like going to the people who have those stories and getting that firsthand as much as possible.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Great advice. Not yet.
Benji, you are muted.
Okay. Hey, I just wanted to say, sorry. Thank you, Claire. I want to say that was great, Claire. I love that addition. So important and such an opportunity to begin the bioregional learning process. Yeah, just echoing what you said. Thank you for that. And I do have to jump off to another meeting here in just a moment. I wonder if we can go around really quickly and just share one word, how we're feeling, and pass it along. Claire, do you mind starting and passing it along? Now you're muted.
Good luck and great to hear all the stuff rising up. And Preston.
Tired and excited all at the same time. I hand it off to Anna.
Also tired, but yes, very much excited and feeling very passionate. Victoria and Jonathan?
I feel grateful for you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Awesome.
Yes.
Benji?
And I'm feeling very grateful that I could spend this time with you guys, that I can, travel on the wires through abstraction and land in the Great Lakes and hear about what's going on. Thank you so much for bringing us along the ride. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great.
We'll see you soon.
Okay.
Thanks for the facilitation, Benji.
Of course. Yeah, we'll do this again on Saturday. Invite your friends.
I saw that.
Bye.
Bye.